Namaskar. Stories have a currency. They lend meaning to our facts. So a few years ago, I found this story. In the 5th century, approximately, it seems to have been a particularly bad time for natural disasters across the globe. Floods, famines, earthquakes. It was sort of almost unstoppable. In Europe, the Ecumenical Council said that this was because of the unbridled lust of the Romans. It was God's punishment. Across the oceans, however, in India, there was a slightly different story being told. So in India, we're talking about a little kingdom that is suffering with drought. The king of this kingdom is a very good man. He's kind, he's charitable, he's devout. His cities are filled with God-fearing people. His forests are filled with holy men. But still, the drought continues. It's been 3 years now. Finally, the king, in sheer desperation, because he just doesn't know what else to do, he calls for a sage. The sage arrives. The sage was supposed to be famous for bringing rain. The sage arrives. He surveys the land. And he says, the problem is, there hasn't been enough karma in this land. So the people of your kingdom have burnt up the earth with their prayers. Where has been the pleasure to cool it down? And so a 3-day festival of love is organized. Everyone is told that they have to participate. And guess what? The rains came. Now, I absolutely love this story. I love telling it. But I have always wondered about it because the only love festival I know of is Valentine's Day. And yes, love is miraculous, but why should Valentine's Day be able to change the climate? A few years later, I found the source of this story. So whereas the rest of the ancient world thought that natural disasters were a punishment from the gods, ancient India believed that it was because Mother Earth had lost her pleasure. She'd forgotten her pleasure. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have the sap run through her veins. She'd forgotten her passion and her desires and her arousal. The word used is that she becomes niras, which is a little bit difficult to translate into English, but basically it's when you lose the joy, the essence of your life dries up. And so the love festivals of ancient India, the karma festivals of ancient India, were not about couples coming together. They were about communities coming together to remind Mother Earth of her own pleasure, to flag up that passion and that pleasure that lives deep within all of us. Because only when nature is bursting with joy can it seep down to the rest of creation. How true is that, right? I was just thinking, we talk about climate change, we talk about wanting to heal the earth. They were talking about understanding the emotions of the earth, bringing the earth to her own pleasure so that she could heal herself. You know, I absolutely love the Karma festivals. My entire focus changed. I started to research the Karma festivals. I love them. Not just because of the way that they've been conceptualized, not just because they're so unashamedly about pleasure and playfulness, but primarily because they're about women. These festivals were conducted primarily by women, because in this context, women and nature become interchangeable. And so women become the microcosm of Mother Earth. And so the Karma festivals were symbolic of the woman arousing her passion and transferring it to nature, and nature in turn promising to nurture the woman's awakening. And so there is, for instance, there are some absolutely gorgeous festivals. I don't have time to tell you about very many of them, but there's one in particular, which is one of my favorites, I think. It's where the women would touch the tree trunk of specific trees with a red painted foot to convince the tree to flower. Now, in case you don't know, with a red painted foot is part of the pleasure vocabulary. It's part of the lovemaking vocabulary. So this is something a woman would do to beautify her foot as she got ready for her intimate moments. So the underneath of the foot would be painted with alta, with red lark. She would then adorn it with exquisite jingling jewelry, not silent jewelry, jingling jewelry, because each thing has its own significance. She'd then perfume it with citrusy fragrances so that at the end of it, it became an object of adoration for the lover, an object of aspiration for the lover. And it was this desire, it was this passion that she transferred to the tree, to nature, when she actually touched the tree, to convince the tree to flower fulsomely, like have an orgasm of flowers. Compare this to a medieval English custom where they used to actually beat the apple trees, specifically apple trees. They used to beat them with sticks because they said that this would chase out the demons and it would give better fruit. Yeah, pick the one that you'd like. There was another one that I think is really beautiful where you would actually sing to certain trees, specific trees, to make them flower better. Now, I know that a lot of people sing to their plants and you're thinking, okay, well, why is that unusual? This was not just any singing. This was where you took the notes that mimicked the sound of humming bees. Because again, this is part of the pleasure vocabulary. The Kama Sutra says, the humming bee sound is one of the love noises. It's the sound that women make when they reach the height of their passion. Do you know that there are parts of the world today where they actually use instruments to create the sound of humming bees to get certain flowers to open up so that they can be repollinated? It's a huge bee crisis across the globe, and these flowers will only open when they hear the sound of hummingbees, and so they artificially create the sound, and once the flower blossoms, they then pollinate it by hand, because if they didn't, the flower would go extinct. They were doing this 2,000 years ago, and not because it was scientific, because they understood the emotions of awakening. And of course, the festivals didn't just happen in springtime. They happened all around the year because nature and humans need their pleasure all around the year. Unfortunately, and I wish I could tell you more about these festivals, really I do. But the problem is that not only do I not have the time, these festivals have also disappeared from our lives. They've actually just been erased from our lives because the texts that they were in have not been translated. And my theory is that, these were not formal gatherings for powerful men. They were just playful, pleasurable gatherings conducted by women. So they probably didn't suit the needs of the people who were translating the text. Our only source of information today on the festivals is works of poets like Kalidas, like Bhanudatta, like Bhoja. They're basically the epic romances, because these festivals then become part of the plot. So for instance, in Kalidas's Malvika Agnimitram, you have the queen sending instructions to Malvika, the heroine, on how to perform the festival, where you have to touch the red-painted foot to the tree. She's hurt her foot. The queen has hurt her foot. She can't do it herself. So she's sending the instructions over. So she tells Malvika how to paint the foot, what kind of foot jewelry to wear, how many times to touch the tree, and so on. And from here, you figure out how the festival was performed. And that is literally how I am getting my information, one tiny little reference at a time. And it is painfully slow. It's painfully slow, but I'm sticking with it because I just think it's a narrative that needs to be brought back. Going back to my first story about whether the answer is punishment or pleasure, Dean Ornish says, and I want you to listen to this sentence really carefully. He says that punishment is not a sustainable motivator. Pleasure is. Yeah? I think it's incredible. He says that people don't make sustainable change in their life for the fear of dying. They do it for the joy of living. And I think that is so true. And I think that maybe they understood that in ancient India. And I think maybe that's why they thought in ancient India that pleasure was the path to redemption. And maybe that's why our ancient texts looked at pleasure as such a procedural thing. It's never random. You read any of the texts, it is so procedural. It's so steeped in rules and definitions and images of refinement, of elegance, because it had a purpose to fulfill. It was meant to elevate our senses from the mundane to the sublime. It was meant to raise our consciousness to such heights that we would be capable of translating the rasa of our own minds into eternal bliss. I really think that it was meant for hugely great things. Now, I just want to point out, I know that when we talk about the Karma festivals and the narrative unfolds in front of us even, you can see the connection, it makes sense. But actually, love, relationships, climate change, environmental issues, they're not that unusual a combination. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of dating apps across the world have started to use this as part of their profile. So you have to write down your views on environmental change in the profile because people are saying, we don't want to match with somebody who doesn't think the same way as we do about these issues. Last year, in 2021, there was a massive, massive survey with 6 million people where people were asked what would be their deal breaker, and 81% of people said a difference in opinion on environmental issues as opposed to 76% who said gender inequality. So I think that our love lives, our relationships have always depended on what nature is doing. I think that the earth has always known it. I think that we just forgot it for a little while. And so, to conclude, ancient India has always, always thought of pleasure as an awakening of the senses, as a Shakti, as an energy. They've always thought of it as the path to fertility and creativity and a general sense of well-being in every aspect of our life. First amongst that, however, must always be nature, because only when nature is absolutely bursting with joy can it seep down to the rest of creation. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a story that we all need to bring back, because if we don't do it in a real hurry, forget love, forget relationships, I think even survival is not going to be an option. So I'm going to leave you with one thing. Remember, the word is pleasure. Okay, pleasure? Yes?